A life of duty means a loveless path, and I've walked it willingly. My future was secured by ancient oaths, with a mate I respect but will never burn for. I knew my role. I accepted my fate. But destiny is cruel when true passion calls. He was untamed power, the alpha of the neighboring territory. And one look from him shattered every ounce of my control. What sparked between us was a dangerous addiction, a secret built on reckless, stolen moments. Then he whispered the question that turned my entire soul inside out. What if I gave up everything? For you? In that moment, I realized the devastating price of my silence. He doesn't know I'm already bound. He doesn't know I belong to another. And when that truth comes to light, it might destroy us both. The covenant brooch felt like a shackle forged in ice and iron, resting heavy against the fragile skin of my collarbone. It wasn't merely jewelry. It was the tangible weight of generations of agreements, the guarantee of stability for the Ironwood territory, and the silence of my own desires. Today, October 12th, the day of the announcement ceremony, I was meant to become complete, to fulfill the covenant. I looked in the polished surface of the mirror, studying the face of Eliza June Hayes, 23. My emerald eyes, usually clear and bright, were shadowed with a fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. My long, dark auburn hair was pulled back in the traditional severe braid, a style my mother favored, one that projected competence and suppressed any hint of wildness. I was a dutiful daughter, and soon, a dutiful mate. A gentle knock preceded the entrance of Ethan James Vance, 28. He was everything the alliance promised. Broad-shouldered, light brown hair meticulously neat, his sharp, intelligent amber eyes reflecting the structure he represented. He wore his impending leadership with natural authority, a man born to duty, who understood its value. "You look prepared, Eliza," he observed, his voice calm, rational. There was no overwhelming heat in his gaze, but there was deep, respectful certainty. He approached and adjusted a stray fold in my ceremonial dress, a minor domestic gesture that solidified the mundane reality of our future. "Duty requires preparation," I replied, the words practiced and hollow. "We bring peace, Eliza. Remember that," Ethan reminded me, placing a large, reassuring hand lightly on my shoulder. He believed firmly in the structure, in the alliance forged by our ancestors. He couldn't possibly understand that peace sometimes felt like an unbearable quiet, a stillness that preceded drowning. He departed, leaving me alone with the suffocating silence of my chamber within the ironwood walls. The architecture here, ancient stone, imposing, built for defense and permanence, was a mirror of the life I was about to claim, a life without surprises, predictable, safe. But safety was a ghost I could no longer grasp. My fingers instinctively went to the inner pocket of my dress, tracing the smooth, cool surface of a polished obsidian stone. It was a physical reminder of the Shadow Peak Enclave, of raw energy integrated with rugged terrain, and of the man who ruled that wildness. It was a fragment of the illicit sanctuary we had built together, far from the rigid walls of my home. I had been meeting him at the Whispering Falls, a remote clearing deep in the borderlands, hidden by mist and rock. Those moments were not part of my destined path. They were detours into a dangerous, necessary wilderness. I remembered the scent of pine and rain, the way the mist clung to the edges of his powerful form. He was chaos personified, an alpha who acted on instinct, demanding yet fiercely protective. He demanded truth, which was the one currency I was forbidden to spend. My time was up. I had to descend to the courtyard. The elders were waiting. Ethan was waiting. The future was waiting. As I stepped out of the heavy stone entrance and began walking toward the main ramparts, a shadow detached itself from the dense old-growth forest bordering the perimeter. My breath caught, sharp and painful in my chest. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not now. Not ever this close to the ceremony. Sterling Grant Thorne, 30, stood before me. His tall, powerful physique radiated untamed energy, a stark contrast to the conservative formality of my surroundings. His piercing gray-blue eyes, always holding a hint of untamed severity, fixed on me. He hadn't bothered to shave, the hint of 5 o'clock shadow only deepening the raw, demanding passion that defined him. He moved with predatory grace, closing the distance, trapping me against the cold stone of the wall. "You look beautiful," he rasped, ignoring the ceremonial weight of my clothing, seeing only the woman beneath. His voice was low, laced with the dangerous magnetism that had pulled me off my axis the moment of our border summit encounter. "Sterling, you cannot be here," I whispered, panic rising. If he was seen, the alliance would shatter before it was even finalized. The conflict he sought to avoid by meeting me secretly would explode into open warfare. "I know the timetable, Eliza. That's why I came," he stated, his gaze dropping to the covenant brooch pinned above my heart. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "I watched you walk away from the Whispering Falls last night, thinking you were only leaving me for a few hours. I didn't realize you were leaving me forever. I had to return. This is my obligation," I stammered, feeling the lie stick to my tongue like ash. He reached out, his warm, rough fingers gently touching the silver of the brooch. The contact was brief, yet it sparked a current that momentarily drowned out the booming certainty of the drums announcing the start of the ceremony in the courtyard below. "Obligation. Duty," he scoffed softly, his eyes returning to mine, burning with fierce devotion. "Do you think I haven't considered what I stand to lose by claiming you? The agreements, the fragile truce, the political stability. The elders of Shadow Peak Enclave would call me mad." His intensity ratcheted up, seizing the air from my lungs. This was it, the precipice, Sterling's offer and ultimatum. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, the soft vibration of his breath sending tremors through my carefully constructed composure. His scent, earth, spice, and raw alpha power, was overwhelming. "I don't care about their alliances, Eliza. I don't care about the history or the territory lines. I care about us," he insisted, his voice dropping to a gravelly, vulnerable whisper that tore right through the layers of my emotional suppression. Then he asked the question, the one that shattered the rigid structure of my world, forcing the inevitable chaos. "What if I gave up everything for you?" My chest constricted, a physical pain matching the depth of his commitment. He was offering the unthinkable. Peace in exchange for war, stability in exchange for pure, dangerous passion. He was offering his entire world, but he didn't know the truth. He didn't know the most crucial, devastating part of my lie. Tears sprang to my eyes, but I forced them back. The drums were louder now, echoing off the ironwood walls. I had to speak, or my silence would become my undoing. "Sterling, stop," I choked out, pushing weakly against his powerful chest. He paused, sensing the desperation, the genuine terror in my eyes. "Just say the word, Eliza. Walk away from this stone cage. Walk away from him. We will face them together." I shook my head, my braids swinging violently, my voice cracking under the strain of the withheld truth. "I can't. You don't understand the depth of this. I understand that you are my true mate," he growled, the alpha asserting itself, demanding obedience where only confusion resided. "No," I whispered, finally tearing myself free, taking a staggering step back. The words tumbled out, ragged and brutal, aimed to protect him from the deeper pain of rejection by giving him the hard, undeniable reason. "You don't understand because I never told you. I am already promised to another mate. It's not just a political arrangement. The ceremony today binds me in a way I cannot simply walk away from without destroying everything my family has sworn to uphold." The impact of the revelation was immediate and devastating. His strong body froze, the intensity in his eyes instantly replaced by a stark, terrifying void. He wasn't angry. He was wounded to the core. The light behind his eyes dimmed, as if a vital connection had been severed. "Promised," he repeated, the word alien and bitter on his tongue. He looked down at the obsidian stone, which was still warm from my touch, then back up at the brooch that symbolized my binding. "You came to me, knowing you were promised to him." The guilt was a physical blow. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I tried to stay away after the summit, but you let me believe we had a chance," he finished, the accusation quiet, precise, and utterly lethal. He took a slow step back, the raw passion gone, replaced by the detached power of an alpha betrayed. The dream of giving up his territory, his life, for me evaporated into the crisp autumn air. The silence that followed was heavier than the ironwood walls themselves. I knew then what I had to do. The choice was horrific, but necessary. To save his life, and to save my community from the war my selfishness invited, I had to solidify the lie, cement the duty. I had to kill the hope. I reached back into my pocket, gripping the obsidian stone hard enough that the rough edges dug into my palm. I pulled it out, looking at the token of our stolen moments, the symbol of our dangerous secret. I met Sterling's gaze, the betrayal in his eyes almost unbearable. With a choked gasp and a final, agonizing surrender to my obligation, I crushed the obsidian stone in my hand, feeling the sharp fragments cut my skin. The physical pain was nothing compared to the sound of my own heart breaking. "Go, Sterling," I commanded, the sound hollow and desperate. "Go back to Shadow Peak. This never happened. I am going to fulfill my duty." He didn't move for a long, terrible moment. Then, with a curt, shaking nod that contained all the finality of a grave dug in the cold earth, Sterling Grant Thorne turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, taking the last sliver of my true heart with him. I stood alone, the polished silver of the Covenant brooch mocking me, stained by the fresh blood oozing from my closed fist, knowing I had chosen peace for my people, but unleashed utter devastation upon my soul. I was bound, and now finally irreparably broken. The drums below swelled, calling the bride to her inescapable fate. The heat of my blood was already cooling on the stone wall where Sterling had stood. I pressed my palm flat against the granite, not caring that the jagged fragments of the crushed obsidian stone, the tiny, dark remnants of our secret life, were still embedded in my flesh. The pain was real, immediate, and blessedly physical, a counterpoint to the soul-shattering emptiness he had left behind. He was gone. Vanished back into the dense, old-growth forest, taking the promise of chaos and the hope of true love with him. I had traded my happiness for the precarious peace of the Ironwood territory. I had chosen duty, knowing that the price was the utter destruction of Sterling's faith and my own future. I quickly wiped my hand on the underside of my heavy ceremonial dress, staining the pristine fabric with a dark crimson stripe that no one would see. I felt like a sacrificial lamb being led to the altar, bleeding internally and externally, yet required to appear immaculate. The Covenant brooch felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, anchoring me to the earth, to the agreement, to the lie. The drums intensified, a steady hypnotic beat resonating from the courtyard below. Come, be bound, fulfill your purpose. I took a breath that tasted like stone dust and impending finality. I straightened my spine, forcing the mask of composure back onto my face. Eliza June Hayes, dutiful daughter, future mate to Ethan, was descending. The descent from my chamber required navigating a series of narrow, winding stairwells carved into the heart of the ancient stone structures of Ironwood. With every echoing step, the noise of the gathered crowd grew, an anticipatory murmur that vibrated with the collective satisfaction of expectation being met. They saw structure, security, and the guarantee of a stable future in this union. They did not see the desperate, broken woman holding herself together by sheer, terrified will. I reached the ground floor, where the light was dimmer, filtered through thick, oiled parchment windows. Waiting for me in the receiving hall was Ethan's second-in-command, a grim-faced woman named Nessa, who nodded sharply, indicating the time for sentiment was over. "They are ready," she stated, her eyes sweeping over me, searching for any imperfection. She paused, tilting her head slightly, picking up on the faint, lingering scent of pine and raw, untamed alpha that clung to my ceremonial gown despite the short intervening moments. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to fracture the composure I was trying so desperately to maintain. "You are agitated, Eliza," Nessa observed, her voice low. "The scent of the woods is strong on you." I managed a slight dismissive shrug. "Nerves, Nessa, and the air is heavy with the forest. It is October." I hoped the lie sounded believable, but fear twisted my stomach into a knot. Sterling was careful, but his presence was a force of nature, impossible to entirely suppress. Nessa studied me for another agonizing moment, her gaze resting on the Covenant brooch. "Be certain that your focus is on the community, Eliza. Your obligations are not small." "They are my life," I affirmed, the words tasting like metal and ash. She accepted the reply, turning to lead the way into the main courtyard. The transition from the cool, dim hallway to the bright, crowded courtyard was jarring. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, a sea of solemnity and satisfaction. The Ironwood territory was known for its austere formality, and the ceremony was no exception. It was held near the protective walls, symbolizing the unbreakable nature of the alliance that secured their perimeter. Ethan stood waiting near the central raised platform, flanked by the Council of Elders and his own family. He was a pillar of calm, utterly reliable and steady. When his eyes met mine, there was that familiar, non-committal certainty. He offered a small, respectful smile, the smile of a man who knew he was receiving a valuable asset, not necessarily a beloved partner. He saw the alliance. He saw stability. He did not see the lie I carried. As I ascended the steps, my knees felt weak, and I had to focus entirely on the ancient stone beneath my feet to avoid tripping. The drums ceased abruptly as I reached the platform, plunging the large courtyard into a tense, expectant silence. Ethan gently took my hand. His touch was warm, but devoid of the burning heat that defined Sterling's grip. It was a comfortable weight, a solid promise of security. "You are here, Eliza," Ethan said quietly. "For my ears only. The peace is secured." "I understand my role, Ethan," I responded, forcing my gaze to meet his steady amber eyes. The lead elder, a venerable woman whose gaze seemed to pierce through the layers of deceit, stepped forward. She began the ancient rites, speaking in a low, resonant voice about covenants forged in fire, about blood spilled for survival, and the necessity of two territories becoming one unbreakable structure. This was the climax. This was the moment I sealed the coffin on my own heart. The elder reached out, her hand hovering over the covenant brooch. "Do you, Eliza June Hayes, accept this bond, knowing that the stability of our people rests upon the honor of your vow and the sanctity of this alliance?" The air felt thin. I wanted to scream, to run, to race back toward the forest and beg Sterling to understand, to forgive me. But the image of open warfare, of the destruction of Ironwood, flashed behind my eyes. I saw the faces of the people who depended on me, people who believed in the rigid structure I represented. If I chose Sterling, I chose utter chaos. I chose bloodshed. I chose selfish love over necessary duty. I looked at Ethan. He was ready to accept me, flaws and all, simply because it was the prescribed order. He was the anchor, the safe harbor. He was the end of the possibility of the wild, untamed life I secretly craved. "I do," I said, the sound barely audible, yet amplified by the deadly silence of the crowd. The elder nodded, satisfied. She then shifted her attention to Ethan. "And do you, Ethan James Vance, accept Eliza as your mate, pledging the protection and stability of your territory to this covenant?" Ethan's reply was firm, logical, and without hesitation. "I do. I honor the ancestors and the terms of the agreement." The elder took a ceremonial silver knife, not to draw blood, but to perform the final symbolic action. She cut a small loop of my dark auburn hair from the severe braid, placing it onto a smooth stone plaque. Then, she used the same knife to gently loosen the covenant brooch, lifting it slightly from my chest before pressing it firmly back into place. "The binding is complete," the elder declared, her voice ringing across the courtyard. "The lines are drawn. The peace is absolute." A great roar erupted from the assembled crowd. It was a cheer of relief, of security, of a future guaranteed. The drums immediately resumed, now in a jubilant, celebratory rhythm. Ethan turned to me, his amber eyes serious. He lifted my hand to his lips, a formal public gesture of ownership and respect. There was no fire in the kiss, only the cold certainty of obligation met. "Welcome, mate," he murmured. My mouth curved into the practiced smile of the dutiful woman. Inside, I was hollowed out, a beautifully crafted vessel with nothing left to hold. I was bound to Ethan, bound to Ironwood, and bound eternally to the memory of the alpha who had offered to give up everything for me, ignorant of the fact that I was already promised to the structure he hated. The pain from my crushed hand was nothing compared to the sharp, cutting realization that I had chosen stability over soul. And now, I would live the rest of my days as a lie, a woman who secured peace by sacrificing love. The celebration swirled around us, but for me, the world had gone quiet, settling into the cold, immutable permanence of ancient stone and iron duty. I was now part of the structure, inseparable from the lie, and utterly, irreparably alone. The roar of the ironwood people was deafening, washing over me like a frigid wave. They clapped, they shouted their pledges of loyalty, and they celebrated the cold, hard success of a necessary political maneuver disguised as love. Ethan's hand, now firmly gripping mine, felt less like a partner's embrace and more like a shackle, heavy, formal, and inescapable. I kept the practiced smile plastered on my face, allowing Ethan to steer me through the throng toward the feasting hall. My ceremonial gown, so immaculate moments ago, now felt heavy and stained, not just by the fading crimson mark on the lining, but by the weight of my deceit. Every movement of the covenant brooch against my chest was a dull ache, a reminder of the structure I had chosen and the wildness I had murdered inside myself. Nessa moved ahead of us, clearing a path, her grim satisfaction evident. She saw the perfect resolution, stability achieved, the covenant honored, and the community secured. The feasting hall was a cavernous space, carved directly into the ironwood rock, already bursting with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the raw, happy energy of the pack. Ethan led me to the raised dais, where the elders and high-ranking members of both territories awaited. This was not merely a meal. It was the public display of unity, the ultimate confirmation that the lines between the Vance and Hayes territories were now irrevocably merged. I watched Ethan interact with his people. He was graceful, authoritative, and perfectly suited to his role. He spoke of strategic security, of future growth, and of honoring the ancestors. When he addressed me, it was always with the same distant respect, a recognition of my value as a resource. "Eliza has brought honor to her lineage," he announced, his voice carrying easily over the clatter and cheer. "She understands that duty is the foundation of peace." I nodded, the action requiring immense physical effort. Duty. That word was now my prison sentence. I tried to focus on the conversation of the elders, but the noise of the celebration became a muffled drone, replaced entirely by the echo of Sterling's last words, reverberating in the hollow space where my heart used to be. What if I gave up everything for you? He had been willing to burn down his world for me. And I, in return, had stood here, accepting a man who saw me as nothing more than a cornerstone in his fortress of stability. The pressure of the lie was suffocating. I needed air, needed to feel the chill of the outside world, anything to dispel the cloying warmth of the hall. "Ethan," I murmured during a lull in the speeches, leaning closer. "I need a moment. The heat of the hall." He looked at me, his amber eyes briefly scanning my face, checking my composure rather than my comfort. "Of course, mate, but do not linger. We must receive the final pledges of fealty." He released my hand with a swift, efficient movement, already turning to address the elder seated beside him. I took the small opportunity and slipped away, excusing myself with nods and polite smiles, until I reached a narrow, unlit corridor that led to the outer courtyards. The air outside was sharp and cold, carrying the earthy smell of damp leaves and the promise of a long, dark night. I leaned against the massive stone wall, letting the cold granite leach the false warmth from my skin. My wounded palm pulsed beneath the silk of the ceremonial dress, a stark physical link to the moment I destroyed the obsidian stone. I closed my eyes, allowing myself a single private moment of agony. I had chosen ironwood. I had chosen peace. I had chosen Ethan, but the choice had not brought calm. It had only brought a deeper, more terrible chaos. My moment of solitude was quickly interrupted. A tall, grim figure emerged from the shadows near the secondary gate. "Eliza. Nessa." She approached, her movements economical and silent, her expression one of barely concealed suspicion. "You stray far from your new mate," she observed, her eyes narrowed. "I needed the quiet, Nessa. The noise of the gathering is overwhelming." She didn't believe me. I knew it. She had scented the wild alpha on me earlier, and now she sensed the tension coiled beneath my composure. "I am surprised you were not more discreet," Nessa said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The scent of the Shadow Peak alpha is still discernible, even through the celebratory smells. "I had assumed, given the gravity of the ceremony, that you would have purged all evidence of your indiscretion." My breath caught. I felt a flush spread across my neck. I do not know what you mean. Sterling was nowhere near. Do not insult my intelligence. Nessa cut me off sharply. We are wolves, Eliza. We know when a territory has been crossed, and we certainly know the scent of an aggressive alpha staking a claim. He was here, near the protective wall, shortly before you descended, and you went to him, didn't you? The truth was a heavy, suffocating weight. I couldn't deny it. The evidence was literally imprinted on the wall behind me and aching in my hand. He came seeking resolution, I admitted, keeping my voice low and tight. He was confused by my prolonged silence. I ensured he understood that the covenant was unbreakable. He left. Nessa studied me, her gaze cold and penetrating. I hope for the sake of Ironwood that he left permanently. Sterling Thorne is not a man who accepts being dismissed, especially not by a woman he believes belongs to him. If the Vance-Hayes alliance is fractured by a territorial dispute sparked by your weakness, the Council will show no mercy. There will be no dispute, I stated, forcing authority into my voice. I am bound to Ethan. The matter is closed. Nessa hesitated, her suspicion battling with the reality of the covenant brooch, gleaming visibly against the heavy fabric of my dress. The physical symbol of the binding was the only thing that seemed to satisfy her. See that it is, Eliza, she warned. Now return to the hall. Your absence is becoming conspicuous. She turned and stalked away, melting back into the shadows of the stone structures. I was left trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization that even in success, the threat of chaos loomed. Sterling's very existence was a political weapon aimed straight at Ironwood, and now, my lie had given him a reason to use it. I forced myself back inside, steeling my resolve. I had survived the ceremony and the interrogation. Now came the final, inescapable stage of my duty. The celebration continued for hours, a blur of toasts, strategic conversations, and endless, painful smiles. Finally, as the moon climbed high and the exhaustion of the guests became apparent, Ethan took my hand again. It is done, he said, his voice calm and businesslike. The alliance is secured. Come, mate. We will retire. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The public nature of the bonding gave way to the deeply private commitment. This was the moment where the lie would be solidified physically, where my soul would be truly sacrificed on the altar of stability. Ethan led me through a winding series of private passages until we reached the highest chambers in the ancient keep, the rooms reserved for the Alpha and his mate. The chamber was expansive, dominated by a large hearth where a modest fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the heavy wooden furniture. It felt sturdy, secure, and entirely devoid of life. He turned to me, the amber firelight softening the sharp angles of his face, making him look less like a stern leader and more like a weary man who had also fulfilled a great obligation. You performed admirably, Eliza, Ethan said, moving toward a low table where a carafe of wine waited. You are everything I knew you would be, composed, resolute, and loyal to the structure. He poured 2 goblets, offering one to me. I accepted it, the cold glass a shock against my skin. Thank you, Ethan, I replied, the words stiff and foreign. He took a slow sip of his wine, watching me with a detached intensity. Now, we begin the next stage of our alliance. I do not expect passion, Eliza. I expect partnership. We are the center of stability for both our communities. Do you understand your role here? I lifted my chin. I understand. We are the fortress. Good. He placed his goblet down. He then approached me, his broad shoulders seeming to fill the entire room. He reached out, not to touch my face or my hand, but to gently graze the covenant brooch. This, he murmured, his gaze resting on the heavy silver piece, is the final confirmation. It ties you to the terms, to the ancestors, and to me. It represents everything we have achieved tonight. His proximity was suffocating. I felt the sharp, immediate memory of Sterling, the primal, demanding heat of his presence, the way his touch demanded a response, never merely accepting silence. Ethan's energy was calm, controlled, entirely safe, and utterly chilling. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the heavy braid of my dark auburn hair, the loop of which the elder had cut and consecrated only hours before. Take off the ceremonial dress, Eliza. It has served its purpose. It is time now for the quiet truth of our commitment. My fingers trembled on the stem of the goblet. I could not move. The lie felt too vast, too consuming to maintain under the scrutiny of the man who now legally possessed me. "Ethan," I started, my voice barely a whisper, a desperate, final plea for grace I knew he would not grant. He paused, tilting his head slightly, a small crease appearing between his brows. "Is there an issue, mate?" The wine in the goblet sloshed, threatening to spill. This was the precipice. I could confess now. I could shatter the alliance, expose my meetings with Sterling at the Whispering Falls, admit the connection that burned hotter than any duty. The result would be instantaneous destruction, but at least it would be an honest destruction. I looked at Ethan, steady, reliable, the safe harbor for hundreds of people. I looked at the covenant brooch, felt the searing agony in my palm where the obsidian stone, Sterling's final token, had been crushed. I had already sealed my fate publicly. To confess now would be an act of betrayal far worse than my secret meetings. It would be an act of war. I straightened, taking a deep, shuddering breath that I hoped he mistook for weary acceptance. "No issue, Ethan," I lied, letting the sound of his name feel natural on my tongue. "Only the weight of the day." I placed the goblet down on the table with a soft thud. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my back to him, reaching up to begin unlacing the intricate fastenings of the ceremonial dress. As the heavy fabric started to slip, I felt the familiar, cold pressure of the covenant brooch shift on my chest. I had chosen, and now, the true cost of that choice began. I was the safe harbor, the fortress wall, the necessary lie. I had survived the chaos of truth, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never survive the cold, endless peace of duty. I was bound, permanently and utterly, to the man who would never ask me to give up everything for him, because to him, I was already everything he required. The last of the ceremonial silk fell to the floor, leaving me exposed to the flickering firelight and the resolute gaze of my new mate. Peace had been secured on paper, but somewhere beyond the ironwood walls, a wounded alpha carried a rage that would not stay buried forever.